Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Hero Arts. In today's video, we are going to create this card using the July My Monthly Hero Kit. We are going to use partial inking as well as layering to really stretch the ink cubes included in this kit and create this colorful underwater card. I'm going to start today's card by stamping the coral scenes at the forefront of the card. That is created with these 3 layering stamps included in the kit. The kit also includes several images and sentiments as well. I just pulled the layering stamps off so you could see them a little bit better. I have a piece of paper here in my MISTI that's 4 3/4 by 6 inches, so larger than an A2 panel. That way I can stamp this scene twice. I'm going to slide this stamp up to the upper edge of my MISTI just so I can use that lip of the MISTI and get my stamp perfectly straight. Once I have that stamp straight, I'll then slide my panel back down and then I'll fold my MISTI over and pick up the stamp. This way my stamp will be more in the middle of my MISTI and I'll get a little bit better impression that way. A really good impression actually that way. Sometimes the lip in the MISTI can make it hard to get a clean impression. I'm going to use these inks today. These are the inks that are included in the kit, just the full size ink pads. I'm going to start by inking this stamp in Key Lime Fizz and then stamping it. Then I will clean my stamp real quick and then I'll ink it up with taffy. So I'm inking the exact same layer again in a different color. So once I've inked it up, I'll stamp it right on top of where I stamped it in Key Lime Fizz, and these 2 colors layered on top of each other create a really cool new color, a sandy kind of brown color. So now that I've stamped it on that half, I'm going to rotate my panel around, line it back up in the corner of my MISTI, and then I'll clean the stamp and ink it up back again with Key Lime Fizz, stamp it, and then I will ink it up in taffy and stamp it just like I did for the first scene. Layering your ink is a great way to get new colors and really stretch your ink collection. So now that I've stamped the first layer, I went ahead and dried those images really thoroughly with a heat gun because I'm going to do some heat embossing for the second layer. So I've grabbed the second layer stamped, positioned it here in the negative spaces. I'm going to pick it up with my MISTI and I'm going to start by putting some anti-static powder because I'm going to do some heat embossing. So I place some anti-static powder down and I'm going to now ink up the stamp with this embossing and watermark ink. I am being careful here, trying not to ink up all of the images. I only want to ink up the detail for the slope. So I'm trying to avoid inking up the coral and the plants. But don't worry if you do get some of that embossing powder or embossing ink there, I will show you a trick to kind of clean it up. So now I've stamped it and I'm going to pour on this coral embossing powder that's included in the kit. I'll then tap off the excess here and then I'll hold it to the camera and you'll be able to see a couple places where the embossing powder stuck to some of the coral and plant images. So some places where I got some of that embossing ink, which I was trying to avoid, but again, a really easy cleanup here just with a brush. So all I have to do is take a brush here and just kind of clean up anywhere where you have that coral embossing powder and you don't want it. So again, I'm trying to only have that coral embossing powder where the slopes are, and there are a couple fish here in the corner that I just went ahead and coral embossed those as well. So now that I've cleaned that up, I'm going to heat set with my heat tool here, and then I think this coral, already the scene is starting to come to life because some of the details are starting to fill in. So I repeated the exact same process for the other half of my scene or my other scene, and now I'm moving on to stamping or inking up those coral and plant images. I'm going to selectively ink here and only ink up a couple of the coral plant images. I'm going to start with taffy, and I do that just by angling my ink pad and just kind of using the very corner of the ink pad. This is actually even easier to do with the cubes that are included in the kit. So again, I'm going to ink it up with taffy, just stamp it twice so I can get a nice solid image. And now I'm going to do some partial inking. So I have Pool Party here. Again, just angling my ink pad using the very edge just to get a little bit of that color on the bottom of those plants, and that will create a little gradation and add some more color. It actually kind of creates like a purple color. I'm now going to ink up the remaining coral and plants. I'm using Pool Party again, so I'm just going to ink those up. Anywhere I get ink and I don't want it, I'll just take my finger and kind of wipe it off of those sections. But again, if you do overlap your colors a little bit, it's okay because this is coral. It's supposed to be colorful. I think think it's kind of fun to have those changing of colors. So once I finished stamping those remaining coral and plants in Pool Party, I then did partial inking with Blue Hawaii to again add a gradation. As you can see here, we get a nice little gradation, little change in color. And that will actually complete my first scene. So I rotated my panel around, and I've already stamped my coral in pink for this second scene. Now I'm going to stamp the remaining coral and plants, but I'm going to use a different combo. This time I'm going to start with Key Lime Fizz. So I inked up those plants in Key Lime Fizz, and I'm going to stamp them. After I stamp them in that color, I will then do some partial inking just like I did before, but this time I'm using Pool Party. So again, holding my ink pad at an angle just to get a little bit of ink at the bottom of those plants, and that will create a little gradation. I just wanted to make this other scene a little bit different from the first, so it just doesn't look so mirrored. So now that my second layer stamp is done, I'm going to move on to my third and final layer. This layer has some more plants and coral in it. I'm going to position it here and then pick it up with my MISTI. So with this layer, just like I did with the second layer, I'm going to ink up some of the plants and coral with one color combo and then the remaining plants and coral with a different color combo. Here I'm going to start with Key Lime Fizz and just ink up basically most of the plants and coral in this layer with the Key Lime Fizz, and then I'll stamp it, and then I'm going to partial ink up those same images with Pool Party. This is actually the same color combo that I used to finish up the second layer for the second scene. So I just stamped that in the Pool Party, and now I'm going to clean my stamp and I'm going to move on to the remaining coral and plants. I think these coral and plants here are just a sea urchin and a sea anemone. I inked them up with taffy and then stamped them, and now I'm going to grab Pool Party again and just ink up that sea anemone with that ink. That's going to create kind of a purple color. Now you could skip this. You do not have to ink up all of these coral and plants in different color combos, but I think it adds a lot of color to the scene, and to me coral reefs are very colorful. So I went ahead and repeated that process for the second scene, and now I'm going to die cut these scenes out using the matching die from the set. So I'll just position the die, and then once I get it in place, I'll use a couple pieces of purple tape to hold it there. Then I'll run it through my die cutting machine, and then I will peel off the tape here, and then you'll see that this cuts out that scene perfectly. Now the die doesn't actually cut the bottom, but because it was so close to the bottom, I was able to just kind of like pull it away from the little tiny bit of paper that was still holding it there. And I repeated that now for the other scene, and now I have both my scenes die cut. Now as you can see, there's a little white border. I'm going to actually cut that off so it's completely like color all the way through, no border. So now I'm going to take the second kind of scene die included in this kit, and I'm going to die cut it use it to die cut a piece of vellum. This is going to kind of be like our background scene. It's going to add a nice little bit of interest to the background. And after I die cut that, I'm going to move on to a couple images. I have the building and one of the dolphins here. I'm going to layer ink for this as well. I'm going to start by inking the images in taffy. Then I will clean the stamps, and then I'll move on to Pool Party, just ink them up completely and then stamp them. And after I stamped it once in Pool Party, I then inked it up a second time and stamped it again. And now that I've stamped it twice, I'm going to move on to Blue Hawaii and do some partial inking, so holding my ink pad at an angle just so I get the very bottom of the building and the very underside of the dolphin. The dolphin is actually upside down right now in my MISTI, and then I will stamp them, and that will again add a little gradation so they have a little bit more of dimension to them. So I went ahead and die cut those images out using my die cutting machine. I've also trimmed down my scenes to remove any of those white borders. Now I've grabbed an A2 side folding card base here made out of Dove White cardstock, and I'm going to ink blend with Splash and Blue Hawaii. Again, two inks that are included in the kit. I'm going to start with Splash, and I'm going to ink blend most of this card front with Splash. I am going to create a gradation, so I am being a little bit more heavy-handed towards the center of the card and then blending lighter on my way out to the top. Once I've got a nice blend with the splash, I then turned my card around and then I started blending with blue Hawaii. I just kind of like to start from the right and blend in. That's just a little bit easier for me, probably because I'm right-handed. Again, I'm continuing with the gradation, having a little bit darker at the bottom and then lighter as it gets towards the splash. Once I finish with the blue Hawaii, I'll then blend a little bit more with splash, and that will complete my ink blending. Now I'm going to move on to stamping my sentiment. I have most of my images here temporarily on the card just so I can figure out the placement of my sentiment. Once I get the sentiment in the right place, I'll then pick it up and ink it up in Intens-ified black ink and stamp it. Now that I've got my sentiment stamped, I'm ready to kind of pull this whole card together. I'm going to start with our vellum and just add a little bit of this liquid glue to the very edge of the vellum. All of that edge is going to be covered up by our coral scene, so we don't have to worry about that glue being exposed. I've also went ahead and added foam tape to the back side of our coral scene, and I'm just going to line it up here and stick it down. I've also added foam tape to the top coral scene, so again I'm going to remove the backing and then just stick it right down to the card front. I really like just by flipping this coral scene, it suddenly creates kind of a totally different look. You've got almost like a cave look here. Now I'm ready to finish this up with my final images. I'm going to add a little bit of foam tape to the building and then add liquid glue to the rest of it where it kind of lands on the coral scene, and then a little bit of liquid glue to my dolphin, and then I'll stick that back on the background, and that will actually complete my card. And I'll hold my card up to the camera so you can get a good look at this colorful underwater scene. I really love this layering stamp set included in the kit. It is so fun to play with, and I definitely had a lot of fun playing with inks, layering them, and partial inking to really add a lot of depth to the scene. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you'd like any more information on the products I used, please head over to Hero Arts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.